These awards, people make a big deal out of them.
Yes.
And they are kind of a big deal, but, it's really, I did something, but not that much. It was, sort of the people in my lab, that were working hard, and people in other laboratories. I think a biomedical advance really requires a lot of work for many years by a lot of people. Participation of patients, physicians that see them, scientists that, sort of are maybe not even necessarily trying to do stuff specifically to solve the HCV problem, the hepatitis C problem. So anyway, Nobel Prizes are for a big group. Some people, and they could consider themselves fortunate or unfortunate, get singled out to actually sort of get the prize. It really does take a lot of cooperation in science to sort of get the job done. And then it doesn't stop there. I think one of the things that I realized in hepatitis C was sort of when the tools were available to begin to develop new drugs to treat hepatitis C, and then eventually we came to the point of really having these amazing medicines that really get rid of the virus in 2 or 3 months of just taking one pill a day that doesn't have very many side effects in most people. And so you would think, you got 50 million people that are infected with this virus at risk of developing severe liver disease and cancer. You should just get them all treated, And it's a whole nother ballgame when it actually comes to really sort of getting these advances adopted, even in a developed country. I think Spain has done a very good job. But the U.S., actually, we've been losing ground with people that are injection drug users that are actually getting acutely infected with hepatitis C. And it's actually, we didn't want this to happen, obviously. It's going up, not down. So public health and implementation is really important too. I think it's, sharing paraphernalia associated with injecting drugs. The opioid epidemic that we're having is really a problem. I think, your path in life is very much determined by random encounters. It's not like I wanted to be a scientist when I was 5 years old or something like that. I enjoyed the outdoors. I enjoyed, sort of biology. I was really, when I went to university, I was completely undecided as to what I wanted to do. And so I took a very broad collection of different courses and, chemistry and math and zoology and biology. And it was actually my instructor in the introductory biology class, Dennis Barrett, who was just a really fantastic teacher. And we got to be, I guess I went up after class and talked to him, and sort of over time we got to be pretty good friends. I initially did some research, undergraduate research in chemistry, but then I started working with Dennis. But it wasn't in virology, it was actually in developmental biology. And he worked on sea urchins, which you may know. These are the things you don't want to step on. But they're really sort of incredible model systems for studying development, because you can get these sea urchins out of the ocean. You can get sperm and eggs. You can mix them together in seawater, and fertilization happens. And you can see through these these guys. So with a simple microscope, you can actually watch development happen. And so, you know, it's very visual, very exciting. And so that I got interested in that, but I still really wasn't sure that I wanted to go to graduate school sort of when I finished my undergraduate work. And I actually, I was teetering on the edge of doing a PhD and going into winemaking.
Oh,
because I went to UC Davis in California, which is a big sort of viticulture and enology university. And anyway, I enjoyed that. So being undecided, I actually ended up taking a year off. So I applied to graduate school at sort of two institutions, UC San Diego and Caltech, both of which had labs that were doing work on sea urchin development. And then my friends and I sort of bought an old used Volkswagen bus and piled into this vehicle and took off into Central and South America for, you know, like 8 months, just sort of being total vagabonds. And when I think I was in Peru at the time, and I got a telegram. They didn't have these phones that you guys live with today back then, from my dad saying that I actually had been accepted into these graduate programs, and the schools were wondering if I was actually going to, you know, show up and go to graduate school. And so I decided I would do that, and eventually made my way back to the United States. And I was lucky in the sense that one of the things that Dennis Barrett had introduced me to was a course in Massachusetts in Woods Hole called the Marine Biology Laboratory there, and they would have summer courses for undergraduate sort of young scientists to actually do laboratory work, listen to lectures. And it was really an amazing place because there were, I guess, all of these famous scientists that really wanted to hang out on the Cape for the summer. And so, you know, sort of they did research and so on. So I ended up taking that course when I was an undergraduate, and then I went back after I came back from Central and South America to TA the course. So I had a little bit of a reintroduction into, you know, a more normal lifestyle. And I think that so I get back to the United States, there's a lot of shuffling around. I decide to go to Caltech. One of the best sea urchin development labs in the world is there. And, you know, when you enter a program as a graduate student, you don't get to necessarily pick the lab that you're going to go to. So they assign you to a lab. And you can change labs if you don't like it or whatever. But I didn't get assigned to the sea urchin lab. I got assigned to a virology lab, you know, which I had no, you know, sort of real experience with at all. And, you know, that was it. You know, I sort of thought that it turned out that maybe the sea urchin lab that I was thinking of joining wasn't, you know, the very best place. You know, the leader of the lab was kind of a cross between a sort of a bit of a prima donna and a Hell's Angel, I think. And, you know, some people found him very difficult to get along with. So anyway, that was sort of how I started working on viruses, and I really enjoyed that. We had a lot of freedom as a graduate student, and in the lab that I was in, that was headed by Jim Strauss and his wife Ellen Strauss. And we began studying a virus that people didn't really care about that much in terms of a virus that causes disease. But it was, in those days, studying animal viruses was relatively new, you know, sort of in the laboratory. There had been a lot of work on bacteria and viruses that prey on bacteria, like bacteriophage. And So it was kind of an exciting time. That was also the time when recombinant DNA, and the ability to sort of clone genes and clone pieces of viral genomes was happening. And, in those days there weren't freezers or whatever. So if you wanted to keep a virus, you had to actually sort of keep it in animals, right? And serially passage it in animals. And so this virus was passaged in rhesus macaques. And it was really, I think, the work on yellow fever virus that, paved the way for our work on hepatitis C. Because when hepatitis C was discovered and reported in 1989 by Michael Houghton, the closest relative in the viruses that had been characterized at that time was yellow fever. And so by that time, I'd moved on to a faculty position and was working on yellow fever. And, this landmark discovery comes out and have to decide, if we're going to actually work on this virus or not. And nobody in the lab is interested in working on it, despite the fact that, sort of when it was discovered, it became clear that there were over 100 million people in the world that were chronically infected with this virus. And we already knew at that time that it was associated with progressive scarring of the liver, which leads to what we call liver cirrhosis. And then there's a high probability that people that have this liver damage, and it's a relatively silent infection, so people can be infected with this virus and they don't know it until they might go to the doctor for some other reason, and then they've got, liver cancer. So the reason nobody in the lab was interested in working on this was because we couldn't grow this virus in the laboratory. I mean, unlike yellow fever, which, we could grow in these minced tissues or later on tissue culture cells, people had been trying with hepatitis C, which was, before it discovered, it was called non-A, non-B hepatitis. And that's because we knew about hepatitis B, we knew about hepatitis A. It wasn't A, it wasn't B, so non-A, non-B. And so then when it was discovered and it was different, that became hepatitis C. Well, I mean, I think, from what I've told you already, we encountered a lot of roadblocks, and, even the subgenomic replicons and these adaptive mutations were not the answer, because when those were, engineered into a full-length genome, they replicated, but they didn't make virus.
Yes.
And it wasn't until 5 years later that there was a rare isolate from Japan that would actually sort of grow in cell culture from a rare fulminant case of hepatitis. So I think, the whole hepatitis C story really revolves around, persistence.
Of course.
And also, sort of the scientific environment that sort of allows one to try things that are hard, that may take some time, that, may not result in a breakthrough or a paper in a year or 5 years or even 10 years. Because the sort of drugs that allowed us to get rid of the sort of conventional therapy for hepatitis C, which was type 1 interferon. So this is a protein that our bodies make that sort of protects us against these viruses. And so when it is administered to a cell, it actually changes that cell potentially from being food for a virus to being completely resistant to virus infection. And if you've ever had influenza, or if you've ever had a reaction to a vaccine and you feel kind of nauseous and feverish, and that's interferon. That's sort of a systemic effect of interferon. And I mean, we really wanted to get rid of that because hepatitis C is, as I said, it's a rather benign infection. And if you're confronted with, you feel fine, and somebody says, well, you're going to have to take, mega doses of type 1 interferon for a year and feel like shit, that's, sort of people are going to put off getting treated. So it was in 2014, sort of when the first interferon-free regimens were shown to work robustly. So, from the realization that there was something out there that we needed to be worried about in the mid-1970s, so 1975, by Harvey Alter and his colleagues, to sort of the discovery of the virus, which is, 15 years later, by Michael Houghton with contributions by us and others, to the replicon system, to drugs, it's 2014. We still have issues, sort of getting these drugs to the people that need them for reasons of cost and availability. Yeah, that was an odd thing, right? Because I did not expect, sort of this at all. So, the secretary of the Nobel Committee, sort of calls up the prize winners in early October. And in our case, in my case, that was in the fall of 2020. New York City was the epicenter of COVID-19. We live in New York City, about 50 yards, 100 yards away from Rockefeller University, where the lab is. And so the university shut down in mid-March of 2020. My spouse and the dogs were at our weekend house in Connecticut. And I and a skeletal crew of, sort of people were working very hard on SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 in the lab. And so I was by myself in the apartment, and the phone rings at like 4 in the morning or something like that. I'm not an early riser. 4 in the morning is not that long after I've gone to bed.
Was it maybe the time
and so
difference?
I thought, this is a bloody, crank phone call. I don't use this phone, so I started pushing buttons on it. I guess I hit the answer button as opposed to the disconnect button. And then, there's this guy with a Swedish accent, sort of sharing this news that, along with Harvey Alter and Michael Houghton, I'm a recipient of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. And I thought, this has got to be, some joke, that my lab folks are playing on me. And he said, well, no, if you don't believe me, there's going to be a press person that's going to call in about a half an hour and ask you some questions. And so, hung up, and I, half an hour later, sure enough, this guy calls up and starts asking me these questions and says, well, if you don't believe us now, you can actually sort of watch the announcement that'll happen at 6:30 or something like that. But then he also said, well, we like to get a picture of the prize winners when they've just sort of heard the news. Well, there was nobody there to take a picture.
And you were sleeping.
And so he goes, well, can't you just take a selfie? So I've never taken a selfie before. I have no idea how to take a selfie. And so, he's trying to explain this to me, and I succeeded in doing it eventually, but I had, sort of pictures of, the floor, it was kind of a mess. So anyway, that's how I heard about it. Well, it was interesting because, basically the world was shut down in the middle of this pandemic, right? So all of the sort of usual things that would be associated with this were not happening. No crowds of people, no trip to Stockholm. Interviews were conducted by Zoom or whatever. I thought that was great because that way I didn't actually have to get fully dressed up. It was only the top half, right? So it was different. I mean, we did end up going to Stockholm a couple years later in 2022 and sort of shared the sort of more traditional experience with the prize winners in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Well, I mean, I have, sort of good things about Spain. I mean, I've never been here, but I've certainly been to Madrid, and Barcelona is quite a sort of a popular spot for meetings. There's a lot of work here on liver disease and liver cancer, sort of in Spain. So some very good scientists there. And yeah, no, I mean, it's, as we can see, it's a great place. Well, I think this is going to be tough because I think they're all deserving. So these things are always a little bit arbitrary. So I guess we'll have to put our heads together and sort of come up with a winner. But I don't think there are really any real losers in this group. Mm-hmm. There are a number of people who have had just illustrious careers in sort of biomedical science, all kinds of different types, some virology, cancer, sort of other areas. And then there are also some just much younger people at an earlier stage in their career that are clearly are already, sort of bona fide superstars. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how, sort of much that will, weigh in, mm-hmm. in terms of the decision. But I do think that, the recognizing some of our young talent is really important because we really want to sort of encourage them to pursue their curiosity and their mm-hmm. passion and, be at it for the next, sort of several decades. And so that's going to have to be sort of weighed against, sort of people that are maybe more in the sort of waning times of their career, but that have really had an incredible, impact for science. So I think it's going to be difficult. Hopefully, no fights will break out. But well, I think we've also got a good group of jurors with very diverse. But it is a little hard, I think, to, sort of, if you're looking at somebody who's not in your specific field, mm-hmm. it's a little hard to, sort of figure out how they, stack up internationally. So a lot of it is kind of apples and oranges, right, to a certain extent. So it's not going to be easy. Probably when we finish this interview, I better go back and get back to work. I think you want to find something that you really are interested in, that you have a passion for, and then I think, hard work, really is, and persistence is really important. I think things in life don't necessarily come easily, and so you have to be willing to commit. And I think, in science, for many of us, we've been lucky enough to have a career where we're, sort of doing what we would want to be doing, even if we weren't getting paid for it. So it's kind of like being able to, be on vacation and, every day, sort of go into the lab and look forward to doing what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Rather than, doing a job to get paid and then enjoying doing something else. So I think you want to find something that isn't a job. Well, we definitely need to do a better job because, we're really sort of facing a situation where people have failed to understand how much of our lives today depends on scientific advances.
Mm-hmm.
And, the lifespan now is, sort of in the 80s for men and women. It was in the 30s, not that long ago, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's really pretty remarkable. And almost all of that has to do with scientific advances, sort of understanding these diseases and what causes them and what we can do to, sort of prevent that from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we definitely need to do a better job of educating the public. And certainly in the United States, it doesn't seem like we've done a great job on that. Now that we have, these preventable diseases with, very safe and effective vaccines, that people are, focusing on the extremely rare side effects rather than the incredible sort of risk-benefit sort of ratio that these vaccines have. It's really tragic, and I hope that it doesn't end up having to be sort of a wake-up call where people have their children starting to die from these diseases that we were close to eradicating, that are now sort of finding their way back. And SARS-CoV-2, I mean, 25 years of basic science led to the sort of rapid ability to develop a vaccine. Sort of now that's kind of in the doghouse, at least in the United States and in certain other places, when it really should not be.
Mm-hmm.
And these messenger RNA vaccines, again, we've talked about that with viral genome behaving like messenger RNA as well, but those RNAs can be delivered and they can elicit immune responses that protect not only against viruses like SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, but also cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting tested for cancer therapeutics. There's across the street from us at Memorial Sloan Kettering, there's a group that has some very promising results on using messenger RNA vaccines against pancreatic cancer, where there's really not a sort of good treatments available.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we need to do a better job educating the public. Part of the problem is now that this has become so politicized and cult-like, it's very difficult to sort of get through to people because they don't want to be bothered with the facts. They're going to believe what they want to believe, and that's that. And I don't know why that is, particularly when that belief puts them at risk. And people have died because of that belief.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know. I think part of the problem is, too, that we really haven't done a good enough job with education in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we'd been more proactive about really educating children in school about science and the value of science and medicine, that we wouldn't be having this problem today. But it's hard to just sort of jumpstart, sort of something like that, because now we're running into, sort of problems with education and allocation of funds for education. That's going to just make the problem worse. I think that, that young minds are actually sort of very plastic, and they're capable of learning, lots of different things. And I think that's really the ultimate secret of, sort of getting a society that, appreciates this value and is willing to contribute to it and fund it. And yeah, I don't know how to get around to doing it right now. I mean, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. I don't know what it's like here in in Spain. If you have a lot of, sort of vaccine deniers and sort of anti-science movements and so on. Some countries just don't seem to have those problems. They tend to believe, sort of scientists and doctors that sort of know these areas well and have worked on them for years. But in the United States, it's become such a politicized problem that I'm not sure what the solution is. Although, as I said, I hope it doesn't take another pandemic, because we're certainly less prepared now for the next pandemic than we were when SARS-CoV-2 came on the scene. And that is almost beyond belief, because I thought that sort of was something that really sort of brought many aspects of life in the globe to a halt. And then the sort of miraculous deployment of these vaccines, which could have been done better and faster than they were even done, and more widely distributed, would have emphasized the importance of really investing in being prepared for the future. And now the exact opposite is happening, with basically funds being withdrawn for all kinds of meritorious research, like developing a vaccine for HIV. All of that is sort of drying up. And people are really starting to make some significant advances. So it's kind of a dark time in that regard. I don't have a rapid solution. I wish I did. I mean, I think a lot of very knowledgeable scientists and public health people are trying to figure out sort of how we can dig our way out of this. But I don't think we've come up with a solution that's going to work in the short term.